All right. Well, today we have with us Mr. Chad Patschke, principal consultant for Ethos, and I think he's more better known as the Office View of the Week guy. So if you
Yeah.
follow if you follow Chad on LinkedIn, make sure you if you don't, make sure you do. He's definitely always traveling and always sharing where he's at, and he's got awesome pictures. Sometimes fly fishing, sometimes not fly fishing. So
Trying to get to more of the pictures of fly fishing versus the work pictures. But right now it's I'd say probably 95% work and 5% fly fishing.
yeah, right. It's real life versus what you put on
Yeah.
socials.
Yeah.
Greg, good to see you. How's it going?
Thanks. Going good. Thanks. Raining here in Houston today. A lot of rain. A little cool, but nice. So that's why I wore my Hawaiian shirt today because I want to have the sun shining at least on the inside if it's not on the outside.
That's great. That's great. Well, Chad, thanks for joining us. How about let's start? Can you give me a little bit of an intro of yourself? We kind of talked about it before, but I think it sounds better coming from you. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Brief overview, little over 30 years of experience, graduated college in 1992, right around when this whole process safety thing was rolling out. And so got heavily involved with that starting out as a plant engineer at a small chemical tolling and hazardous waste management plant in Houston, Texas, Deer Park, actually, on Battleground Road. And we can get more into the specifics on that later. And so really cutting my teeth on process safety and specifically mechanical integrity, trying to figure out how to keep the stuff in the pipe. Everybody was trying to figure it out then because that regulation had just rolled out. And then did that for a few years and then decided to go work for Mobil at the time at a refinery in Joliet and started out in the process safety group. And they found out quickly that I had my API certifications. And so I got brought over to the inspection group, probably, I don't know, 6 to 9 months after I started at that refinery. And I think the official title was advanced corrosion engineer, something like that. But basically, engineer supporting the fixed equipment group at that refinery and obviously supporting the inspectors, and just really enjoyed my time there, soaking everything I could up from some very, very experienced inspection personnel. Survived the merger, became ExxonMobil, and then for family reasons, relocated, had to leave that company. I hated doing that, but had to leave that company and move back to Central Texas. And we relocated to just outside of Waco, Texas, and I started working for Imperial Chemical Industries. I was working for the paint division, and I was hired as the engineering manager for the plant in Temple, Texas. And if you've ever used liquid nails, basically flammable peanut butter, it was at the time, I don't know if it still is, was made in Temple, Texas. And so I was the engineering manager brought in to develop their mechanical integrity programs and keep the plant running and still make money. And must have done okay at that job because they made me North America PSM manager. And I was responsible primarily for building mechanical integrity programs at all the North America ICI plants. So we had plants from Puerto Rico to Toronto, one in Huron. I think we talked a little bit about that earlier. We can talk about that more later if you want. But so I had a bunch of plants across North America. Overall objective was to develop all the process safety management programs, develop or enhance the process safety management programs, but the primary focus was mechanical integrity. We dealt with a lot of solvents, and so we did have some significant incidents. And so that's one of the reasons why I was brought in. Did that for a while. They made me mad because I had a great boss. Shout out to Lee Lawrence. He was with ICI, an amazing individual. He's retired now, lives in the UK. But they were kind of just moving people around and I don't want to say forced him out, but they let it know that it was time for him to retire, and I hated to see him go. So I went to the switched over to the dark side of consulting, and I called ABS Consulting. Had been courting me for years, saying, "Hey, when are you going to come work for us?" So I called them up one day, and they said, "You can start tomorrow if you want." And so gave my 2 weeks, or maybe it was a month's notice, and then started working for ABS Consulting, I think in 2008, as the manager, mechanical integrity services. So any MI related project that went through ABS, I was not solely responsible for, but had my thumb on the pulse of, and making sure it was heading in the right direction. So did that for a few years, and then started Ethos in 2014 as a primarily mechanical integrity consulting firm, but it quickly grew to all things PSM. So the official title of or legal name of the company when I started it was Ethos Mechanical Integrity Solutions LLC. And as we grew to do all things process safety, I did doing business as Ethos Process Safety Solutions. And so started using that name, and it's just been a wild ride since we started Ethos, and doing tons of compliance audits, mechanical integrity program deep dives, 751 audits, API process safety site assessments. It's taken me all over the world, offshore, onshore, chemical plants, refineries, fertilizer. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. Oh, ammonia refrigeration. So I get to see a whole bunch of different things and the different ways to meet the intent of the regulation and even go above and beyond, and just really enjoy what I do because I get to see so many different ways to keep the stuff in the pipe.
Chad, that was fascinating.
It's probably way more than you wanted to hear the initial, but
nah, man, that was great. I tell you what it ignited in me is asking you a question. I don't know if we want to fully go here yet, but maybe there's a way you can weave comments about this throughout our discussion. But I've kind of taken for granted of like, what was the culture in the plant? Because you and I have somewhat similar backgrounds in chemical industry. And I'm like, going from, I worked in a PSM environment for probably a little over 10 years before 92. And then PSM comes in. And of course, everybody's not changing overnight or, getting to where they need to be. And they're probably still not here how many years later, right?
yeah.
But you were in that transition, and you came in at a transitional time. Man, you must have some thoughts about how has this industry changed? How did PSM impact the industry, and specifically mechanical, and within a context of mechanical integrity or fixed equipment reliability?
Yeah. So when I was about to graduate Texas A&M in 92, they rolled out this specialty. It was a system safety specialty. And I think it was because they saw the process safety management regulations coming to fruition. And so I went ahead and signed up, and I think you had to take 12 extra hours to get this system safety certificate. And it introduced you to fault tree analysis and root cause analysis and all the other. It wasn't really like the PSM regulation, but it was how to manage the safety of systems. And so it kind of gave me a little inclination. I didn't know what PSM was until I took what the PSM regulation was until I took that first job in Deer Park, Texas. And it was more of a, we now have this new law, we've got to comply, kind of figure out what we got to do to meet the bare minimum of that regulation, because it's expensive, right?
Right.
To comply with process safety, all of the different elements of process safety, especially if you didn't have a line item in your budget when that law first came out, you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I keep OSHA and eventually EPA off my back and still make money? And so I've seen, to long story to get to your question, I've seen initially a lot of that. We need to comply. What's the bare minimum? Go out and take a couple of thickness readings, go out and do your visual inspections, and, put it in a report and put it in a in a drawer somewhere so that if a regulator shows up, I can show them what I need to show them. And one of the things that I've just loved as being part of this industry is how it's been embraced since then, and people see the value of a robust mechanical integrity program. And it's not just to check the compliance box. We actually see the long-term benefits of a smart, effective mechanical integrity program. And so it's come a long way from when I started in 92, obviously. I'm sure, you've seen it even before that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, go back to the old days. I'm not saying this happened to me specifically, but I remember, someone telling a supervisor they needed to inspect a reactor. And the initial reaction was, well, how old is the reactor? It's like 35 years old. They said, well, we haven't had a problem in 35 years. Why do we need to check it now?
Exactly.
And then there's the other argument, our real challenge. And I'd like to hear you speak to this, Chad, is, after I left Monsanto back in the 80s, or when was that? Early 80s, the mid 80s. And then I went to work for DNV at that time. And so I began working in this area of safety and inspection and, all that kind of stuff. And so the real frustration, especially starting out early with risk-based inspection, but this is true for a lot of technologies, what I'm about to say is how do you educate management to the point that they're willing to invest in something to prevent something from happening that hasn't happened yet?
Yeah, that is the challenge. If one of my $1 million ideas is putting a dollar value on savings when an inspector has a good find, and you had a near miss, you were below T-min, and the inspector doing their job found something, and they don't get enough accolades these days when they make those finds. But if we could have some sort of magic formula that would say, if you hadn't found this incident could have occurred, and this is how much that would have cost, I think the management would easily see that it paid for this person's salary and all the expenses associated with that tenfold. And I can't remember the famous quote. It's like, and I don't remember who said it, but if you think this is expensive, then what about the accident I just prevented, and that selling that to management has been a challenge throughout my career. AICHE CCPS put together a pretty brief, it's been a while. I don't know if it's even still around, but the cost benefit analysis of implementing process safety management and what the benefits are, financial benefits are of implementing that PSM program. And it's, it is a tough sell, especially when you are wanting newer technology or more resources to continue. Like you said, why do I need an inspector? I haven't had an incident I haven't had a release in 10 years. Well, you probably haven't, because you got a good inspection group, unless something unique changes, they're doing their job. And so that is the justification for that. And it's a tough sell sometimes, especially with companies, smaller companies that have to comply with PSM, but they don't have the financial backing or the corporate backing as like the majors do. And so it is a true challenge. And, we can always keep kidding ourselves and say, safety first. But if you're not making money, if you're not making profit, that business isn't going to be around much longer. So you have to find that balance of what is the most effective, efficient use of my resources to prevent a catastrophic release from my process.
Yeah, I like how you said that, effective first and then efficient. You must have been listening to a guy named John Reynolds at some point in your life.
Yes, I've listened to John Reynolds for many, many years, whether I want to or not. But no, I love it, man.
Yeah, I love it too. I mean, but you John points out a good thing when he says this, and you did as well. And I think that sometimes engineers, if they're not careful, can get so caught up in efficiency that they forget about effectiveness because of the pressure to make money now and fast and or whatever, the culture. That's why you have to keep sharing what you're sharing, and people like John, whose shoulders, a lot of us have stood on for many years, and other really great men and women out there that have made a lot of contributions, Chad. And, recently along this same vein, I read and I'll pass it along to you. I think you'd like to see it. It was something from LinkedIn, somebody had put in, but it was about how management, here we are cruising along. Let's just say hypothetically, here we are cruising along. We've got a good reliability, mechanical integrity program. Everything's humming along and, no problems. And then something happens. And then what I've usually seen happen in the past is that the industry will react initially, and regulatory forces may react initially. And there's this sudden awareness of what's happened. And then we go through this cycle where people are addressing these things, and then things get quiet for a while, and then we start backing off. And so the concern now is among many is that, hey, if you look at some of the stats, we're doing better. So Chad, in that same vein, I read an entry on LinkedIn not too long ago that really struck a chord with me. I shared it with a few others. I'll be happy to pass it on to you, but it was a really poignant writing. It really got to me. And he's talking about how when we're doing our jobs and things are running along smoothly, and that goes on for any period of time, the first thing that'll often happen is management will come back and want to cut out some stuff because they haven't had any problems in a long time. And it's a very interesting story. And I'm not saying everybody does that, but certainly we've all seen that. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. I don't know if I heard it from somebody else or where it came from, but I've been saying this for years. What I see industry in general is it's a 15 to 25 year sine wave. And so at the bottom of that wave is when the sites are given the directive from corporate, we got to cut costs. You need to manage your programs at the site level, and you figure out how to comply and how to meet all the expectations. And then they have one of the sites have a significant event, and then it ramps back up to corporate has all this organization at a corporate level that now develops all of these documents that mandate this is how you will manage your programs. And here's all the shall statements and the requirements. And we have all these corporate level resources that are going to help you. We're going to come in and help you build these programs. And then memory starts to fade. And then, trying times, and we start cutting corporate overhead and cutting costs. And then we get back down to the bottom of that sine wave where it's the site's responsibility to manage their programs. And then it spikes back up. I'd say, and this is industry in general, the majors have got it figured out, but industry in general, it's that cycle that I've seen in my years doing this, that you see that memory loss of why we built this corporate department and why we have these corporate standards that say, here are the minimum expectations. And like I said, if you're not making money, you're not going to be in business. And so I get it, but I wish as industry as a whole, we could figure out how to prevent that spike back up.
Well, thanks. That makes a lot of sense. Fully agree.
Chad, you've had to have thought about this before. I mean, if you were rolling out a program for a new facility, how would you do it so that way you don't have that sine curve happening?
Well, everything you develop has to be sustainable, and you can't predict, what's going to happen in the market in the future, and what resources you will have access to, and what resources will be cut because of budget cuts. And so the best solutions I've seen is having some sort of well-documented management system that says, at a bare minimum, we will not compromise on these pillars of mechanical integrity. And then, you build around those, and you modify your programs as you learn from your experience collecting inspection history, et cetera. You can tweak around those, but you never deviate from those initial pillars that the basically the skeleton of your mechanical integrity program. And, I'm a big proponent of documented management systems. I still go into sites that they have some very knowledgeable, experienced hands that know how the systems work. But when they retire or move on to different positions, not having that knowledge captured in a management system is very detrimental, because memories are short in corporate, in the industry. And so to me, it's very important to capture that in a management system that describes, like I said, at a bare minimum, where we got to have these programs in place.
Would you go to the level of, like, how do I say this? When you first roll out that documentation, would you make it extremely detailed, or would you keep it high level, and then as you operate and see how the people within the facility or people within your group, as they come on, and would you empower them to make more details once they're kind of running things?
I see this all the time. Documents that are not issued, that, they stay in draft forever because people think that they have to be perfect and they have to incorporate everything. My rule of thumb is get it 75, 80% there. And as you deploy it, either across the sites or at a single site, you're going to get feedback, and you're going to learn from that, and you're going to tweak it and modify it and learn from your lessons learned, incorporate those lessons learned into that document. So I would say get it 75% level of detail that you want, roll it out and see what comes back and slaps you in the face. And as far as feedback from individuals, and then just let it grow and develop. One of the things I enjoyed working when I worked with Mobil and ExxonMobil is they have been honing their management systems for decades, and they know, and they're still, tweaking them and modifying them, but they know they are rock solid. And it's just been years and years and years of deploying those management systems, learning from them, updating them, and just continually growing. So I really appreciate the level of effort that they put into those documents, and how it was reflected in their program.
Yeah. Yeah. When I talk with folks, I talk about different industries and where they are along their journeys. Do you see that different industries are in different places when it comes to robust PSM MI type programs?
Yeah, like refining, obviously heavily regulated. OSHA, EPA knows they have a lot of money, so they're gonna really pick on refining. So most of refining is doing an excellent job. Obviously, the majors just continues to amaze me, the level of effort that refineries put into their mechanical integrity programs and process safety programs in general. You get into the chemical plants that have a little tighter margin, is especially like paint, solvent. Anybody that sells to Home Depot or Lowe's or Walmart, it's very difficult to make money and continue to operate because those margins are so tight. And so the tighter the margins, I guess, the quality of the PSM programs sometimes suffer because they just don't have the same resources that these larger companies do. And it's like I said, it's a fact of life. You've got to find that balance, and it's no fault to them. They're doing the best they can, but you have limited resources.
Yeah, you still got to make money, and if you're not making money, then you can't be open operating to
Right.
be able to put a program together.
That's right. And
right.
Then you get into some of these smaller, like renewable fuels or biodiesel co-ops, and they're a great opportunity to make some money, but they don't have a corporate staff of PSM experts that are telling them how to manage their PHAs and MOC programs and all of that. We really don't get involved. Ethos really doesn't get involved in companies like that. We try to market ourselves to companies that truly want to do the right thing and are trying to enhance their process safety management programs, not clients that just need to check a regulatory box. And that's, you get a lot of pushback from those types of clients when we try to tell them what good looks like.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, yeah, but if I just do this, OSHA will leave me alone. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I've always said that to meet compliance, if a 10 rung ladder, the 10th rung is the best in class. To meet compliance, you'd only be at rung 3 or 4. There's so much more that you need to do
Right.
to be industry leading in process safety, mechanical integrity. And, we try to stay away from those clients that are just trying to get to rung 3 or 4 and survive,
Right. But in the end, I think where you were leading to, correct me if I'm wrong, is they got to be competitive. So we may all
Yes.
be on somewhat of a level playing field at rung 3 or 4, but beyond that, if we want to be successful and competitive, we need to be addressing best practices and implementing best practices and all these other things, which Chad and Brandon, we haven't gone here yet. Chad, could you speak to, because I want the audience to understand, I mean, you've been in a lot of facilities in this hemisphere in North America, and you've seen a lot of things. Can you give our listeners, and again, this isn't meant to brag or nothing like that. This is for substantiation because I want them to understand the weight of what you have to offer. How many of these types of audits have you done? Can you talk about, the different types that you do? And then this business and then hone in on that area, like a lot of us here in the States know about the AFPM API, PSM type audits. Can you share a little bit of that with us so they understand, this is good
Sure.
stuff. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So just to kind of give you a feel for what I do on a day-to-day basis now, I've been, like I said, I've been doing compliance audits, program assessments, mechanical integrity program assessments since around 2008 with ABS and then Ethos. And it's really taken me all over the world. Like I said, offshore platforms. I've been Africa, Korea, Singapore, all over Europe, China, and everywhere in North America, pretty much. Except for one refining company and a couple of the very small refining companies, I've been in just about every refinery in North America.
Multiple times, right?
Multiple times, you're right. Doing not only PSM compliance audits, but API 751, HF alkylation unit audits. And in 2012, API, AFPM started this process safety site assessment program that has really got me into a lot of other refineries and some chemical plants. And I was on the very first process safety site assessment in 2012, and I've probably done, I don't know, 150 of those. I think I've done more process safety site assessments than any other API assessor. I'm sure Ryan at API will correct me on that, but I was on the very first one, and I do more than everybody else because they're semi-retired and they like to stay home sometimes. But in addition to that, the PSM compliance audits, I've been in, like I said, just about for the majors, at least one, if not all of their refineries doing some sort of compliance audit there. And then in my program gap assessments and program development, I've probably done over 200 compliance audits. I don't know how many 751s, probably, I don't know, 40 or 50 751 audits. And those are all over the world too. So it's been a wild ride. So I've seen a lot of things. And one of the biggest kicks I get out of my job, what keeps me showing up every day, is going to a new site, see a different way to meet the intent and achieve best practice in certain areas, get to see the best of the best, and sometimes, not so good programs.
Right.
But
Right.
It's been a wild ride.
Well, thanks. That's very, very helpful, I think, for our listeners. So Chad and Brandon, you jump in here whenever you want to. I'll ask this question. So in your journeys, are you seeing, or would you see whether or not, for instance, special emphasis programs does the owner operator have an IOW program in place, and how robust is it? I don't know if you cover IOWs as part of any of these, if they're doing them, and then do you grade what you think the maturity or the effectiveness of their program is?
Yes, definitely look at IOWs, look at damage mechanism reviews, making sure that those programs are in place. I would say industry as a whole, we got a long way to go with IOW programs. Some companies, as you know, have had IOWs for a very long time, but a couple of the most significant enhancements, I believe, in our business, mechanical integrity, is the pushing the damage mechanism reviews and the implementation of the IOWs. Back when I started doing this, it was you took a little spot UT meter and you had a little formula. I got 100 feet, I got an elbow and a T, so I got to have, X number of CMLs. And you were just out there, even if the damage mechanism was cracking, you were out there with the spot UT meter, taking thickness readings, because that's all we knew to do, right? And so that's how I started out. And it's like, okay, I patted myself on the back because I got my UT readings today and did my visuals and, filed my report. But, as you know, we've gotten smarter, more efficient. Basically, when using that technique, you're looking for a needle in a haystack. You're trying to find that one little area of localized corrosion. Hopefully that CML is on there. But as we got smarter as an industry, the implementing those damage mechanism reviews and focusing the 80-20 is what I always say, focusing 80% of your expertise and knowledge on the right 20% of your process, where you're going to have that damage mechanism, is making your program so much more efficient and effective. And then implementing the IOWs. I've got an analogy that I've used for a while, and I don't know that industry as a whole has come to understand it, but my analogy is fixed equipment mechanical integrity programs. How I know you have a mature fixed equipment mechanical integrity program is if there's an incident at a site, and the site manager or corporate, when they come in to that meeting and ask the person, how did this happen? Who do they ask? And bear with me, this is going to be a little bit of a journey. So the analogy I use for a mature program is, and I'm not a NASCAR fan, but is a NASCAR car. So if that corporate person or the site manager comes in and asks the inspection supervisor or the reliability manager, how did this happen? Their program is not best in class. If that site manager or if that corporate person comes in and asks the operations manager, how did this happen? I know they've got a good program. And this is why. If you've done your damage mechanism reviews and you know exactly where to look for your potential damage mechanisms, and you've implemented integrity operating windows, so you know what parameters you need to operate in, then that inspection group is more of the pit crew or the auditors of your asset integrity or mechanical integrity program. The operations group, they know what parameters they have to operate in. They know how hard they need to push and when they need to back off when they're driving that car around. They know every time they hear a little shimmy. They know every time they've exceeded a limit on that car. We've got a lot of diagnostics back at the pit crew, but they are the ones that own that equipment now. And they've been given direction on how they can operate that equipment, how hard they can push that car, when they need to come in and change those tires. And same thing, we as a fixed equipment mechanical integrity group, we give them those parameters to play in, and we know what damage to expect if they stay in those parameters. And then you come in during turnaround, we go in, we validate. Yep, we expected to see this damage here. We change out some tires, and then we get that car back out on the track. Same thing with those operating units. If that site manager or that corporate person comes in and asks operations, then all the way up through the organization, they've been educated that we know what our damage mechanisms are. We know how to inspect for them. We know what operating parameters we need to operate in. And something changed for this event to happen. And so we need to know what changed.
What does it take for a company to have that kind of culture?
Exactly. And I've seen it. I've seen it. And so I know it exists, and it exists at a few companies. And when I see operations taking full ownership of the asset integrity or mechanical integrity program, I know they've got a robust program. When I see the process engineers walking around with a 3-ring binder with the damage mechanism review study with tabs on it, and they know what will happen if I exceed this IOW, and they understand it, and they're meeting on a daily or weekly basis with the corrosion and materials engineer, corrosion materials specialist. That's a really robust program. And so I know, that I can kind of step back and say, okay, I'm not going to find much here when I come into, I'm only going to be looking for little things that'll get you a little incremental lift in your MI program when I see a culture like that.
What do you see in those cultures specifically? Or what have you seen? What do you see that help to not only create that type of environment or culture, but also to sustain it?
Joint ownership, and I don't want to use any company specific terms. What I've seen a trend lately is the organization is breaking up into what I'll refer to as business units. And that business unit includes operations, process engineering, corrosion materials, inspection for that particular area. And they all own that program. And they are meeting daily, weekly to discuss schedules, due date, what changed overnight, what upsets did we have. Everybody is on the same page. There's constant communication. There's not an ivory tower where a corrosion materials engineer or specialist sits in and you have to, humbly knock on the door and, bow as you bring in some kind of report to review. No, that corrosion materials specialist is in those daily meetings or weekly meetings to discuss, what's happening in our units. And then another good sign that I see is during turnarounds, those corrosion material specialists are crawling through those vessels with the inspectors to either get more educated or help educate newer inspectors on the potential damage mechanisms and what to look for. So it's just that ownership across the board from operations to inspection to engineering for that asset integrity program.
Wow. Thank you.
Do you think it's people or process that really helps drive that culture? Because some of that you just described was people, and some of it was also process. Which do you think one helps more than the other, or are they hand in hand?
Unfortunately, one of my biggest concerns in industry now is all of the turnover. During COVID, we lost a ton of good people to other industries because, working from home is cool, yada, yada, yada. So I can't rely on, they're excellent, knowledgeable people out there, but I can't rely on people as much as I can on a process. And that's why I'm so adamant about having documented management systems that describe how these processes need to work and what the roles and responsibilities are, so that no matter who you plug into that position, they know exactly how they fit into that organization and what they're supposed to do. I wish I could, and again, there's tons of talented people that I just admire and love to work with out there, but unfortunately, they either move on to other jobs or they retire. And without that documented management system, your history is going to repeat itself. So that's, I guess I would say, process over people.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'm picking up on from your perspective, you really drive home that as long as we've got things set up right, we're going to be able to hold on to longevity. We're going to be setting ourselves up for the future.
Absolutely. And it's the last thing on people's mind when they're fighting their day-to-day action items. And, as John Reynolds would say, feeding the beast of the inspection data management system, trying to get all the data in so I don't get my hand slapped for having an overdue inspection or not collecting thickness data. it's hard to think about, well, I need a documented management system for how we're going to review IOWs on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis and capture exactly what we do. I think we have a good practice in place, but we need to put that on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
That's always going to get pushed down the road. That can is going to get kicked down the road. And it's so important, in my opinion, but it's also the last thing that people want to do because they have other, their day-to-days.
Yeah.
And so it's those insightful leaders within the organization that say, we need to capture this. We need to document this. I want this implemented as a documented management system that I think helps provide that sustainability. Because inevitably people are going to leave. They're either going to leave that role, they're going to leave the company. And if you don't capture that on a piece of paper, like I said, memories are short and history is going to repeat itself.
It's funny. Earlier you said about, obviously we have to make money or we're not going to be viable, right? A viable business, but we need to stay in our lane too and do things that we need to do. So what you just said too reminded me how over the years I've looked at, and Brandon, going back to your question, people and process. And I agree with you, Chad, 100% process. Because today, I think over the last 10, 15 years, we've learned to say, okay, this terrible thing happened. What broke down in the process?
Right.
What broke down in the program? And it's easy to point your fingers at somebody or whatever, but rarely is there one person or one thing that led to that. If you look at the spinning Swiss cheese model, 754, this stuff,
Sure.
it's something broke down in the process. But the other thing I would like to point out, though, to the other idiom that comes to mind is that the value of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
In that context.
This is going to sound corny, but when I go to API meetings or AFPM meetings and sit in and listen, individuals there are truly trying to do the right thing. There's very little discussion around, well, that's going to cost too much, so we're not going to do that. It's what can we do to drive the industry in the right direction? And there's so many people out there at these meetings that are just trying to push and get those programs the best they can be. And I wish it may be OSHA and EPA. My interactions really don't lead me to believe this, but maybe they do. I wish they would see how sincere and how forward as an industry we are working to get it right. And again, not just for compliance, it's business sustainability, it's public relations. There's a whole bunch of different drivers for having an effective and productive mechanical integrity program. But I get the impression that OSHA and EPA thinks, well, we're just trying to do the bare minimum to check the box. And in my opinion, everywhere I go, that's not the case. We truly care about the people that work within our organizations and are they're just working very hard to do the right thing.
Agreed.
I don't know why I went down that rabbit hole, but something you said that made me think about.
That's all right, man. It's good. And in fact, that idiom of the value of the whole being greater than the sum of the parts, I think points to the fact that it is a process. It is a system. It's not just one individual or one piece of equipment or one practice or one procedure. It's all those things together that really, because if you lose any of those within that supply chain, the whole thing could fly apart, right?
That's right. That's right.
Or you could have just certain sick members or parts of the body, that need to be addressed. So thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks a lot for a lot of the things you're saying about what I'm interpreting as mentoring and still the value of mentoring in this world. AI, I am a proponent of AI like I am of anything to a point, but I really like what you're saying about mentoring.
One of the common things that I see when we do these audits and assessments is, and why I'm bringing this up is I think AI will help with this, is we focus on feeding the beast, collecting the data, pumping the data into the IDMS, but we're really not good at analyzing that data. And when I say we, I mean industry as a whole on average. A lot of places I go to, we're only there for 3.5, 4, 5 days. And, we're trying to find opportunities for improvement in your program. And one of the easy pickings is to dive into the data and run a couple of queries in your IDMS. And the data is screaming at you saying, hey, you're about to have a problem here. But many organizations don't look at it because they're too busy feeding the beast. And so I think AI has a huge potential in helping run those queries in the background and pull that data and slap you in the face with it and make it easier for you to continue collecting data and not have to do that deep dive analysis as often or as effectively if you could implement some sort of AI program to help with that. That's where I see a big benefit. Now, inspection groups as a whole are usually techie geeks, and they like the newest, latest, greatest toys and the fancy NDE, and most of it is really effective. But I just don't want to get too caught up in that because there's that human element that you got to have to make that educated decision on when we're going to go after that piece of equipment. I don't think AI is going to be able to replace that, at least in my lifetime.
Great. I totally agree too. Decisions have to be made. And you mentioned another couple of words there together that I like. And, having been involved in things like RBI and RCM and these different things, the fact that these programs, if they're good, we need to keep them sustainable, right? And keep them up to speed. But we've got to have this environment of continuous improvement because we've got the owner operators have people coming to them all the time with the latest and greatest technology, software, this, that, this. And so let me ask you this, as far as continuous improvement goes, let's say I got a good inspection program in place, RBI, engineering, fixed all this stuff. What do you think some of the best tools are out there for us to measure continuous improvement? Are these things doing their job? I know you mentioned earlier about near misses and documenting those and stuff, which obviously is very important if you want to support your program and have it continue to be supported by management. Don't even let up on that. Don't ever I agree with you. You got to keep that out there. But and then we have our IOW programs, we have our DMR programs, we have a CCD programs, we got painting programs, we got this, we got that. How are tools like failure analysis and other ones, what do you see? Or would you even consider failure analysis one of those?
I mean, it is a tool, but I would prefer to enhance the programs before you have to do the failure analysis. And so the constant revalidation and update for your IOW program, your damage mechanism reviews, having that continuous improvement program for those, constantly looking at those and keeping them evergreen. Your risk-based inspection program, don't just look at it every 10 years. Every time you do an inspection, update your RBI program based on those inspection results. Update your integrity operating windows and your damage mechanism reviews, keeping those evergreen. It's that evergreening process it will sharpen the tip of your MI spear if you keep those evergreen and continuously updating and modifying those based on lessons learned. Not just, I don't think we do enough as an industry near miss investigations and what we consider to be a near miss, and implement lessons learned from that near miss, not just at that specific area where we found it, but across the site. I don't think we do that well enough. I think that would be a huge improvement for continuous improvement, but also evergreening your management systems, the IOW, the damage mechanism review, the risk-based inspections, and incorporating lessons learned, not just, if you have multiple facilities, not just at that individual facility, but sharing those lessons learned across the fleet and the industry. I think we do a great job of that at API. I think lawyers are kind of a boat anchor when it comes to that, slowing that down. And, they have a job to do too. But sharing those lessons learned across the industry is going to keep us sharpening the tip of that spear.
Thanks.
Sure.
So as you're talking there, it makes me, okay, you can answer all, none, or part of this question. when it comes to special emphasis programs, processes, whatever you want to call it, what is one that you wish was compliance? And what is a compliance process program item that you wish maybe wasn't because it's causing too much fog, or it's something that nobody can get right and it's not really adding that much extra value? Do you get what I'm asking?
Yeah. And there, it is finding that balance, focusing. I said this earlier, focusing 80% of your effort on the 20% that is going to really cause or could potentially cause a catastrophic release. Some of this stuff is non-corrosive. Some of our processes are non-corrosive, and we're still required to go out and do these periodic inspections, even though we're not going to see anything. With RBI, you have some flexibility there, but if you're following the API code, well, I still got to go out there and look at that. Through doing a detailed DMR, implementing IOWs, there are some parts where we still have to spend money and we still have to do those inspections. To me, it just meeting the minimum for compliance there, I'm cool with that, right? I want you focusing your 80% on the 20% that is going to be causing you problems. And so to me, that making that determination of where I really need to focus my funding, my continuous improvement, let's go look for the latest, greatest NDE for this 20% of my process. And again, that's the whole 80-20 rule. But this other stuff that I know through years of inspection and corrosion materials engineers are telling me this, and just the benign process that it is, that I just need to check that compliance box for that. Making that determination is important, because what you kind of common theme through this podcast is you still got to make money. So you want the resources looking in the right places and having the most efficient use of those resources.
It's great. I mean, Greg and I were just talking just the other day, and we were having a conversation with somebody, and it was, how many times do you go out and look at something that's not a problem? Over the course of 20 years, you're spending how much money, how much time, how much effort on something that is continually telling you there's no issue here.
Right.
And right. So how much do you need to continue to spend? Right. Yes. Go look at it. But how much do you need to really continue to that often go check it when you got other stuff over here that's really going to cause big problems and is telling you
right
you're missing it because you're spending all that other time?
Yeah. So check the box, the compliance box for the benign process, and focus your resources where you really need to.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned if you could use AI to look at things. So I've done this. I've taken an IDMS database, and I've exported out data, and just the data, not any identifying or anything like that, just the data. And I ran it through, and I said, tell me what you see here. I trained it a little bit on things, and it came back, and it was like, you're looking at 60 or 70% of the CMLs you're looking at aren't showing anything. And so you're going to spend, and I was like, right. And so I'm like, how much money am I spending here? How much money am I spending there? What am I doing? And you start thinking about it, and like, the reason that your run and maintain program is so expensive is because you keep adding places, or you keep keeping places that aren't adding value or aren't showing anything continually.
Right. That goes back to my point of feeling that obligation to feed the beast and not analyze the data. You've got this zero corrosion rate over the last 30 years, and you've got 40 CMLs on that circuit. Why? Well, I haven't had time to review the data, and I'm not comfortable taking CMLs off, because the first one I take off is going to be the one that bites me. There's a lot of like superstition with inspection, and I want to be overly conservative, because I don't want to be the guy that has to be potential cause of the incident.
Every inspector you talk to, they always say, hey, I'm not going to go up on the stand. I'm not going to be the guy sitting on the stand. Every one of them, right? That's the theme. So it's definitely.
And I get it. I mean, but that's where your corrosion material specialist, your inspection department supervisor or manager, that's the insight that they have to, they have to extract that information and make those educated decisions. Because I mean, having been an inspector, you're putting your name on that dotted line and saying it's ready, it's good for the next 10 years. There's a lot of liability there, and I get it.
Yeah, that's right. So John Reynolds' name's come up a couple times here. I'm curious, who across the time, because you also mentioned being a part of the API compliance team. What is it?
API Process Safety Site Assessment.
That one.
We don't call it compliance. No, the API lawyers will let you call it compliance, but it's an industry leading practice assessment program. We have a protocol that has a long list of topics with industry leading practices, and we assess against those.
Okay. I believe John's one of those. Is that right? Is John part of that group?
He was for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you mentioned some other folks that are partially retired now. So from a mentorship standpoint in your career, who would you point to as some folks that have really made a big impact on you?
Well, John Reynolds is number one. I first met John Reynolds. I was with ABS, and we were investigating an incident, unfortunately resulted in 2 fatalities, and it was fixed equipment MI related. And they had a mixing tee that had fish moused, and some individuals got coated in hydrocarbon. It ignited, and they didn't make it. And so ABS was there doing the investigation, and the lawyers, the refinery lawyers brought in this subject matter expert. And this little short guy comes walking in to the trailer and says, take me to the scene. And I was like, okay. And so I took him out there. He goes, I can tell you exactly what happened. He looked at it for 30 seconds. I was like, dude, you don't know. And anyway, that started my relationship with John a little bit after that. So he went his way, I went my way. We spent a fall from like Thanksgiving, probably January the next year, working that investigation. So got to know him really well. And then a little bit after that, there was an incident at a refinery in Salt Lake City. And I was on that investigation team. The CSB was there. And I said, you ought to call this guy. He's a pretty sharp dude. And called John Reynolds in, and he helped on that investigation too. So we had a good relationship there. I credit a lot of my success in my career to John. He brought me in and got me on the API subcommittee for inspection and mechanical integrity as a voting member, and just has spent a lot of time, nights and days with John on various jobs. And he always amazed me. I thought I would have heard it all from Mr. Reynolds, but then a certain subject would come up and he'd throw some stuff out there that I'd never heard before. And I would just blow my mind that all of that stayed in that head of his. When the API Process Safety Site Assessment Program started in 2012, I mentioned I was on the initial assessment and quickly realized the protocol for fixed equipment mechanical integrity. I was the only person that was doing the mechanical integrity protocol, and quickly realized that it needed 2 people. And so I immediately called John Reynolds and said, John, you need to get in on this program. And, John being John, he looked at the protocol and said, this is crap, but we need to rewrite it. And he did an excellent job rewriting it. And that led to another person who's very influential as a mentor in my career. He mentioned another gentleman that worked at Shell that had just retired, Mr. Mark Bell, who I think you have also done a podcast with. And so between John Reynolds and Mark Bell, I work with Mark at least, once a month. We're on assignments together, and just am a sponge around him and John Reynolds every chance I get, because I've always learned something new on every job with either one of those individuals.
I learned a ton just from having both of them on, same as today, sitting here and talking with you. So I appreciate them, and I appreciate you with coming on and sharing everything. Thank you for listening to Upon Further Inspection, a mechanical integrity podcast. This episode was co-created by Inspectioneering and Core Solutions. Our producers are Nick Schmoyer, Jocelyn Christie, and Jeremiah Wu. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal or professional advice. Listeners should seek their own qualified advisors for guidance. If you enjoyed this episode, please join us next time wherever you listen to your podcast. Until then, stay safe and stay informed.